Hi, everyone. Welcome to Seco Science Center's winter webinar series. This is the second of our 3 webinar series, so stay tuned. Maybe we'll let you know at the end what our third and final webinar will be. But tonight we're here to focus on gray seals, conservation and fisheries. We have some really exciting guest speakers this evening, and we're interested to hear what you have for questions. We have a few questions that have already come in. But I'd also like to remind everyone, and I'll try to do this a couple of times throughout our chat this evening, to send in your questions. So if you're watching either on YouTube or Facebook, you can just chat your questions in and they'll come directly to us. So my name is Ashley Stokes. I'm the Marine Mammal Rescue Director at the Seco Science Center located in Rye, New Hampshire. We also have Brian, our Community Outreach Manager, on the back end that's managing all the technical side for us. And then we'll get into our 3 guest speakers. So thank you again all for chiming in tonight and spending a little bit of time with us to learn about gray seals, fisheries, and the different issues that we're working through as researchers, biologists, and fishermen. So Dre, would you like to kick us off and introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted.
So I'll start with, I have barking dogs, so we're just going to start with that just in case the mute button goes on. But thank you for having me. I'm so excited that this is the topic that we get to talk about. I'm Andrea, or Dre Bogomolny. I consider myself an interdisciplinary community scientist. I'm also work doing the seal research program at the Isla Shoals for the Shoal Marine Lab, and I'm at the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium as the chair there. But the seal program at Shoals is amazing, and where I really love spending time. So right near you, not too far.
Great, thank you. Owen, how about you?
Hi, I'm Owen Nichols. I'm the Director of Marine Fisheries Research at the Center for Coastal Studies out in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Been there for, I think it's my 22nd year with the center. And I work collaboratively with commercial fishermen, mostly here on Cape Cod, but I've done so in other places in the world as well, but mostly here in the Northeast US. We do collaborative research working with local fishing communities, so very much what Dre described in terms of community-based research. And I also teach a course up at Shoals Marine Lab in the summertime, closer to you guys as well.
Great. And then I don't think our third guest speaker has joined us yet, a little bit of technical problems, but Doug will be joining us shortly. But until then, some of you out there may be wondering how we all came to be in this, albeit virtual, room this evening. How we came up with this webinar and what prompted us to work together, and do we work together outside of this? So for speaking for myself, I met all of you, Dre, Owen, and Doug, through NASRC, the North Atlantic Seal Research Consortium. And then aside from that, I've also done some seal capture and sampling work with Dre as well. So for me, that's how I've met everybody. But Owen, how about you?
Yeah, so I first met Andrea at a Society for Marine Mammalogy biennial conference. I think it was 2003, if that's possible. I hadn't actually thought about the time math for how long we've known each other and worked together until now. But more recently than that, I think we developed a friendship first and then a collegial relationship where we've been working together on issues mostly related to seals, how they relate to ecosystems, how they relate to fishing communities. Dre can tell you a lot more about how she works with those animals in particular, but we've known each other for a long time.
Very nice. And then how did you guys, we're going to speak for Doug here, how did you guys bring Doug into the fold of the work that we all work collaboratively so close on?
Yeah, it's actually a really great story. And so just to kind of fall back to what Owen was saying, is it's amazing when you can do collaborations and your partners and your partnerships are these sort of opportunities to develop more relationships and friendships. So that's where Doug comes in. So I actually met Doug at one of the seal captures that we were doing on Monomoy. We were actually at Stage Harbor in Chatham, getting ready to go out on a freezing cold, frigid January day, all in our Mustang suits, not the cars, the suits. And he drove up with a friend of his and was like, "What are you all doing? It's freezing cold. There's a bunch of people. What are you doing?" So there I was, went up and just talked to him, because I think it's so important to share what we're doing and to listen to everybody else's stories too. So took a chance and said, "This is who we are. This is what we're doing." And he said, "Well, I'm a fisherman and I'm just really curious about what you're doing." So we started chatting and decided, hey, I was at Woods Hole at the Oceanographic at the time, and I just welcomed him. I was like, "Come down anytime." And I also have this colleague and friend that I think you'd really love to meet, Owen Nichols. And we should all talk. And so we ended up, after that, actually, I think, sitting in the boatyard on a picnic table, kind of talking about things as well soon after. So just being able to be open and have conversations has led to this, probably, I don't know, 6 years ago or something like that. So it's been a really great partnership and collaboration through time.
Nice. And then Owen, how did you meet Doug?
Well, I honestly can't remember when I first met Doug. I think it was after Dre met Doug. That we're in a relatively small community out here on the Cape, but still, you don't always run into each other. But yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure when, but it wasn't long after Dre did. I think we ended up doing. It might have been something like this together, where we did some sort of a lecture or a talk together, or something like that, and we built a fast friendship and a collaborative relationship as well. And it all starts with conversations, just like Dre said. Just being out there, part of that community. And you tend to run into people and strike up a conversation, whether it's at the dock or the coffee shop or whatever it is. But yeah, I think if you're out there and literally put yourself out there sometimes, whether it's going out on a boat or whatever it is, those conversations can really lead to great collaborations.
Great. So diving right in, so we'll cover a variety of topics this evening. So just bear with us as we work through them. But first and foremost, not getting directly into seals or not getting directly into fisheries, I'd like to chat a little bit about, we all know it's no surprise that ocean use is increasing as a whole, whether it be animal use increasing or populations increasing or people wanting to be out on the ocean, in the ocean. And then, of course, the fishermen as well. They have livelihoods to uphold. That's their full-time job. So just thinking about all of those different things and this notion of coexisting, and how do we best coexist, and how do we keep the ecosystem kind of in check? Oh, and Doug's coming in. Doug, welcome. So Dre, do you want to speak to that first, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think through the beginnings of our interests, whatever they are in our world, I think for all of us, there's this tie to the ocean, as you said, right? There's increasing populations of animals and people of use. But the common thread behind everybody, I think, is we want a healthy ocean. So for me, that's where we all begin. How do we think about coexisting? Is really thinking about that first need that we have or desire, that we all want a healthy ocean. And that to me is how we get to the point of talking about coexistence. How do we sustainably use the limited resources we have and actually appreciate the non-extractive part about our oceans that wants us to protect it, but also how do we sustain what we are taking and need from it as well. And that's how we start thinking about coexistence, is where is that, just like any relationship, where's that compromise that we can all come to, where we can actually work together and be in the system and keep it healthy, so we can have fishing, we can have energy, we can have use that's just to enjoy it, seal watching, right? Or anything. So that's to me what it's really all about, is understanding how do we keep a healthy ocean and how do we talk together in order to find that common understanding.
Great. And you guys out there, you'll hear us talk a lot about collaborative research and partnerships. And that's, for me, and I think I probably speak for all of us, it's the most exciting part, when we can get into, never would I have guessed that I'd attend meetings and work alongside fishermen or even citizen science projects. It's really exciting when you can get different people involved and cross the boundaries of where you think you might have worked, but you can get into other work and other research to help people. And when it can involve the public, that's really exciting as well. So that different avenues or different walks of people can work together to help solve some different questions or answer questions or uncover new things, which we're constantly doing. There's a lot, especially in marine mammal work, that we don't know about these animals. They're living their lives out at sea, and the fishermen are out at sea and they're fishing, and different ways that we can uncover these questions will bring us further and advance this science. Owen, do you have anything you'd like to add to that before we move on a little bit to gray seals?
No, I mean, I think you guys kind of captured it there. Yeah, no, I think we could probably move right on to seals.
Doug, welcome.
Let's move on to Doug.
Would you like to say hi to the group? We kind of introduced you and how we all met for you, but I'd like to give you a minute to
Sorry,
hi to everybody.
sorry about the questions, but I have everybody on the screen right now, and it's like everybody's in slow mo, so I don't know what's going on, but I made it. Are you okay?
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. So just Doug Feeney, commercial fishing at 26 years, and got interested in doing science with these two, and been having a great time ever since. Collaborating with them. So that's about it for me. I'm just a Chatham fisherman who loves feeding people. That's my mission.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's jump a little bit into, and Dre, you might be great to kick this off, just kind of the current status and the history of specifically gray seals. Just kind of where we're at now, where we used to be, what are the populations looking like, and what did exploitation do in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a great story to share, and hopefully one that people know more about, because right now you may never know about the past history of seals with what we have today. So gray seals specifically, so harbor seals and gray seals, and we have harp seals and hooded seals around as well. But gray seals and harbor seals have been a part of our ecosystem here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So as long as there have been people here, there have been seals. And we know this through archaeological records, through anecdotal information, through stories that have been passed down from indigenous people. So they've been here for a very long time. What happened though in the 1600s, people discovered that this land in this area from afar was a great fishery resource area. Cod, groundfish was really what drew people to here, to New England. Very creative name, I always say, New England, right? And since that time, this use of resources started ramping up. So, I would say fast forward thousands of years from when people and seals were coexisting and being utilized, right, in a way, to the 1700s. And resources started becoming more limited as people started extracting them from our waters, from whales, right? Whales, seals, fish were being used and extracted. So again, fast forward a couple more 100 years in a very short period of history. If you think about it, by the 1800s, a lot of these resources were becoming completely depleted. And that included our fisheries as well. Fisheries were being taken out. And there was this perception, and it's called a perception. This is how people reference it because we don't have data to really understand what the exact numbers were. But we do know they were seals, and we do know that there were less fish because of fishing pressure. And there was a perception that there was a direct competition with seals for fisheries, and that was why fisheries were declining, even though we know there was all this extraction happening. So because of that, a bounty hunt was placed on seals, which means that a person could go out in Maine and Massachusetts and kill a seal. And if you brought the nose of the seal back to town hall, you'd get a couple bucks. So it was really effective, very effective way of reducing the populations of gray and harbor seals in US waters, Maine and Massachusetts specifically, to the point where in that short period of time, just 80 years, gray seals were extirpated. So there were still gray seals in our ocean, but they were so far out at sea on this little island called Sable Island in Canada. But in the US, they were gone. Zero, zero, none could be found. Maybe one or two, but really nothing. And then harbor seals, just because of how they live, there were pockets of them. So maybe a couple hundred or so. And because there were so few, a lot of people started taking notice that these animals that used to be there were no longer there. So Massachusetts actually passed the Gray Seal Protection Act in 1965 because there was a realization that this animal that they call the Nantucket horsehead was missing from our waters. And then after that, we know that we had federal protection through the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And through those protections that were put in place, one, because there was a realization that they were important to the ecosystem. I always say not just because they were cute animals. They were essential to our ecosystem. Protection was placed and they could actually regain the populations. So along with land protection, so places like the National Seashore, US Fish and Wildlife, we could actually have these animals come back to places they've historically been, and we know they've been for thousands of years. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a background. Tried to go through that quick. But I guess the main point is that we went through a period where they were just completely decimated, and now we're coming back because there's this time that's passed to let them come back to a point where perhaps they were before.
Great, thank you. So hopefully that gives everybody a little bit of a bird's eye view into the history of gray seals and why some of us, we may think that there's so many out there, but we haven't been used to a time when we've seen animals in these numbers out there. So can you guys talk a little bit, either Owen or Dre, about just kind of the ecological role of these animals, and how do they fit into what we're doing, and why do they need to be here? Why is it important for them to be here for a healthy ecosystem?
I can take a stab at it first, if that's okay, Owen, and then jump in, please. It's so critical in so many ways to think and ask that question. How do they fit, right? What is their place? And we are still learning so much about how these animals fit because they've been gone. So we are understanding more with whales. No disrespect to the whales. They get a lot of attention, but we're still trying to understand now with seals, maybe what that role is. And one of the most amazing stories that has come up with this rebound or repopulation and recovery story is that we can start uncovering some of these really cool stories. And this is one of them. I always love showing people this picture of horses and seals on a beach. And it's sort of like, why are you showing this picture of horses and seals on a beach? This is Sable Island, the island I was talking about that was so far offshore that these animals could live and be at, even though they were being hunted in other places. And on this island, all there are a couple of researchers and these wild horses and seals. And there's been studies that have shown that because the seals are there providing nutrients through their poop as they come on land and at sea, that it's providing nutrients to the grasses. And those grasses grow, they hold the beaches in place and prevent erosion and also feed the horses. So that grass is sustaining larger animals, and it all comes back to what the seals are providing. And we're trying to understand, what does this look like in the open ocean, in coastal environments, that they're actually providing nutrients, perhaps in places that are nutrient limited. So that's one way. And then other ways that we're trying to understand is, how do they really fit in, I guess, or kind of link in the food web when you have one more mesopredator, which is what we call seals, come back from basically the brink of nothing in our system. And how does that start changing those threads that link the food webs together? But there's so much more, and we're only beginning to understand it again. And it's such an exciting part of our story to understand. Yeah. And this is actually a really fascinating part. So these little fish right here in the stomach of, I believe, a skate are sand lance. And sand lance is such an important forage fish in our ocean and such an important prey item to a lot of different species. So how does this all fit in if we start talking about food webs and who's eating what? A lot of times we tend to think of this very simplistic A to B to C model of a shark eats a seal, eats a fish, but it's way more complicated than that when we really look into it.
Well, speaking of what things are eating out there, let's talk a little bit about, and Doug and Owen, you guys can probably jump in here, a little bit about depredation. So first off, kind of what is it? Everybody out there listening this evening might not know exactly what that is. And how does it impact fisheries?
Yeah, I mean, Dougie, is it okay if I go for a sec? You're frozen in thought there, so maybe I'll go while you get ready. Yeah, no, I mean, and to your point, Ashley, about our relative memories of how long these animals have been here. We've just started in the last couple of decades to see a resurgence of seals in our area, and with that has come an increased number of fisheries interactions. And one form those interactions take is something that we refer to as depredation. It's one thing that happens when a seal encounters fishing gear. They can get caught in that gear, which can be referred to as bycatch. Depredation, it comes from the Latin, I believe, depredare, which literally means to plunder. In this case, it means that the animals are removing or damaging catch that's in a fishing net or other type of fishing gear. And there's a great example of a winter skate that's had its belly bitten out by a seal. And certainly seals are not the only animal that do this. We see bite marks from other predators as well in the catch that we document on board Doug's vessel and on board other studies as well. But when this happens, when seals or other predators feed from nets or otherwise damage catch that's in a net, of course, it comes at a cost to the fisherman, and it comes at a level of risk to the animal as well. If an animal is being attracted to fishing gear in some way, it can get tangled in that fishing gear potentially. Here's an instance where you had presumably a seal or other large predator leave a big hole in Doug's net, and Doug can certainly speak to that more. Maybe it's a good opportunity for Doug to talk about his experience.
Yeah, so it's something we didn't see to this. Back in the days of cod fishing, there always be your depredated cod and that out of dogfish. Dogfish are ferocious, and sand fleas are ferocious. But we started noticing the bellies being taken out of like the codfish, and then the skates with the rebound and seal population. So the question that we're facing is that is it the seal chasing its forage fish nets, or is it the seal just sitting there eating out of the gear? And we're seeing signs of the seal just eating out of the gear because do you blame them? It's a buffet sitting right in front of them. So it's a double-edged sword, sort of. It's tough. But we're trying to work through it, figure it out.
Great. And, it's easy to think of people assuming that, these seals are coming through, they're only eating however they're eating out of the nets. But I can only imagine Doug being a fisherman, when you're out there, you're trying to catch, whatever quota you're catching for the day, and, you're pulling your net up, and then up comes either a seal entangled in the net, or like we just showed, a big hole in the net. And then you can't reset that gear back, I assume, because it has a giant hole in it. So, how does that set you back? Not only the cost, but even just fixing the net or taking the time to get a new net, just to kind of put that into perspective to the viewers.
So it does do a tremendous amount of damage to the gear, but I think we're to a day and an age that I think that we really need to look at our fishing practices and the way we fish. There's opportunity on our end to adjust a lot of things. We're going to start with experimental gear this year to hopefully help alleviate that issue of seals getting caught. And fishing practices, where and when. That's a pretty big one. There's things that we do to make this not happen so much. And then there's also things that are out of our control. You know, sometimes it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. You still got a buffet sitting right there, and they're a creature of, eat whatever's available. They're going to eat like that, and it's hard in that aspect. But there are things that we can do on our end to help with this.
Great. And Doug, can you explain just a little bit about kind of the type of fishing that you do, and how you get interacted with these gray seals?
All right, so I'm a gill netter of 26 years. I was a hook fisherman, as you see the boat there was set up for. Came down to economics, really, is the long line gear was costing more and more money when I could just have one string of gill nets and reuse them over and over. I do something a little bit different than most of the fleet. I leave with the gear and I come home with the gear. So I do something called stab setting. When I find the fish, I'll drop the nets on them and then haul it back an hour later. And an hour later, I can have my limit of dogfish, 6,000 pounds. Typically, that's not the way of gill netting. It is usually set the day prior, and then that's where we work on it as fishermen as we move forward. Is the skate fishery? It really is to get your limit the only way to fish. But at what cost is the question, and that's something that we're gonna hopefully be talking about at some point. So it's gill net done, and gill net can be done horribly wrong. So it's a moral question amongst a lot of people as far as fishermen, and it's also it's going to be a management question at some point if this keeps becoming an issue. But hopefully we have a little bit of an answer with what we're trying to do with modifying gear, and hopefully that will be the answer to all.
Great. And Owen, would you like to chime in here too?
Yeah, I mean that was a great diagram and a great explanation of how gill nets work. They essentially, as a fish, or sometimes unfortunately another animal that maybe you don't want to catch, swims into that net. It gets caught. And so imagine something a little bit like a tennis net, in that schematic there. And we've got a lot of underwater video that we've been working to collect as a team with Dre, Doug, myself, Alex Bocconcelli from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and a lot of students and other colleagues all working together. And so, we generally understand how a gill net works, but we really wanted to get a firsthand view of what was going on the bottom. And so we started outfitting Doug's gill nets with cameras, and it was a really great way for all of us to get an insight together to see what's going on. So here you can see us figuring out how to put a camera on a gill net, and this was absolutely a collaborative effort. Scientists tend to get these egg-headed ideas, and then fishermen tell them how to actually do it. And this is a good example of that, actually getting our hands on some of Doug's nets in his backyard and really thinking practically about how to do this. And as you could imagine, what we thought we were going to do and what we ended up doing gradually evolved over time. Here's a great example of us actually putting a camera on a net. And this is one of those things, like it takes a lot of hands and a lot of brains, and you're often thinking and adapting on the fly here. And this kind of gives you an example of what it's like to do scientific research on an actively fishing boat. It's a lot of rope and net and things flying around, and you're trying to move quickly, and what you thought was going to work in the lab might be a little different when you get it on the boat. But to that end, we ended up getting an enormous amount of data working together as a team. And I think we'll probably have an opportunity to show you some video footage.
Great.
Yeah, so here's a great example of that footage. So what you're not really seeing in this frame is the actual net, but if you can see a line kind of at the bottom of the screen across the bottom, that's essentially the foot rope. And then you can see there's a rope at the top left, another line there with floats there. That's the head rope. And what you're seeing is dogfish actually swimming right through the gill net. And that's a pretty amazing example of how these nets work. They're designed to catch very specific things of specific sizes. And so you can see one large predator swimming right through a net, not getting caught. Here you can see some examples of smaller fish swimming both through and over the net. So there's a whole little ecosystem going on down there around these nets here. And you can see some small fish passing right through. This really gave us a tremendous amount of insight as to what was going on around those nets, and not just what's getting caught, which is what we see when those nets come up on the deck, but the entire prey field around the nets, the way different animals behave around the gear. And it was a really fascinating set of insights, combined with Doug's knowledge of the fishery and some of the things that we learned from things like seal stomach contents to paint a much more complete picture of what's going on down there. There's a little mini ecosystem right around this net here. There's so much happening here and so much we can learn.
Great. I know I already learned a lot. I had always assumed that gill nets were set and then checked a day or so later. So thank you for that. So let's move a little bit, for sake of, I'm trying to watch the clock here too. But let's move in a little bit to chat about maybe the future of fishing and what can be done for all to coexist. Just kind of, have you guys thought about gear modifications? I know there's some testing that's being done and getting underwater footage. Maybe changing target species. I know, Doug, I've heard you talk about that a little bit in meetings, which I can only imagine is tough to switch gears. But let's just get into that a little bit.
All right. So we're, it's not as easy to jump into another species because we're done with them. We're left with skate, dogfish, monkfish, and that's the abundant. So I think it is crucially important that we figure out an answer to this. And the bycatch is a big issue. When you, like you said, you thought that we set here a day before and we haul a day later. That's how the fishing fleet does fish. And let's say your quota is 6,000 pounds, but you're really catching 8 to 9, and that 3 goes overboard. There's got to be a better way. We got to figure it out, and hopefully it is gear modification, which we'll be trying this summer.
Great. Oh, and can you speak a little bit to deterrents that have been tried, or any success, any failures that have been worked on so far?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways we can sort of think about how to make nets a place that seals don't want to be. And one way to do that is to change the net itself. Another way might be to create an active deterrent of some sort, something that an animal may not like to be around but isn't going to injure the animal. So there's been a lot of work done globally with using different acoustic deterrents to keep marine mammals away from fishing gear so they don't get entangled or they don't become bycatch and drown, whatever that type of negative interaction might be. And so we've been doing a little bit of work here in the Northeast, trying some of the different devices that have been tried in other places with other species or other types of fisheries. You're seeing some images here from an experiment that we did with the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, some weir fishermen, the Eldridge family out of Chatham. And there's a set of experiments testing an acoustic deterrent that have been used on fish farms overseas in Europe. And so trying to see if we could use those to keep gray seals out of fish weirs, which are a large fish trap, essentially. and they've had a serious issue with gray seals coming into those traps and feeding. It's not necessarily a situation where we observe a large amount of mortality of seals, but it's a place where they're either feeding in the trap or in many cases, as we've observed with sonar, actually driving the catch back out of the trap. So they're not just feeding in there, but they're driving the catch out. So we've been experimenting with different types of acoustic deterrents. And to be honest, we haven't had much luck yet. I think there's still things we can try. But I think, unfortunately, these animals have most likely become I'll defer to the folks who know more about seals, but from my perspective, it just seems like they've become so habituated to some of these food sources that some of our traditional ways, or when I say traditional, I mean relatively recently, but the things that might work for other marine animals may not work in this instance. And I think there's more to be done and more things to try, but so far we haven't had much luck. But I do think there's more we can try.
Always coming up with new things. And the habituation is a good point too. Doug, I think I heard you a number of years ago now talking about how these seals, I mean, they're smart. They're not dumb animals. So they're literally hearing the boat coming and they're realizing, oh, here we go. It's time to eat, kind of following back into the harbor, right up to your slip. So, thinking about how we can prevent that from happening too is, I'm sure, something you think a lot about, Doug, as these animals are following your boat around.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more. There was actually a meeting I was at a couple of years ago, one of Dre and Owen's meetings, and a couple of scientists came up to me and like, oh, look at this seal we got plotted going all the way out to George's Bank and back. That's when we were tuna fishing out there and throwing these massive guts and heads over, and he followed my boat all the way out to George's Bank and all the way back, and they had the plot on a computer. And I was just like, can you believe it? But they're posted up in the harbor now for when you come in and unload. And when we unload, there's a lot of like dogfish pups that go overboard. A skate wing might fall, and they're all there waiting to receive it. But on the other end of it too, there's a lot of people that feed them. So, like I said, it's a double-edged sword. There's people that think it's, a charter guy thinking, hey, look at this for my charter people. Check out this seal. Or just basically our fish falling off, going into the bucket, or even the dogfish pups we wash off the deck is, that's 20 pounds of free food for them.
Right.
So it's tough. They're trained, and now we have an issue with a ginormous seal. He's massive, that jumps right on the boat. He's got to be 10,000 pounds, Dre. He's huge, but he's just a really big seal, and he comes right up on the boat, 6 feet out of the water, with his belly in the checker, and takes a fish. And I haven't done anything bad except grab a dogfish and whack him off the head, and he just turns and looks at me and continues eating, goes back in the water. But we're getting to the point now that maybe somebody not paying attention, a crew guy or something like that, is in the wrong place at the wrong time and gets bit. So the moral problem is going to become, who is it? All the people that have been feeding the seals, training them this way? Bounded population of seals. It's tough. To do a lot more, because we this issue, as far as them getting real cocky, because there have been numerous people that have fed them. And actually, the reason that Owen and I are together and Andrea is the first meeting, I thought was throwing up pictures of fishermen feeding seals, and I was the first picture. And I was just like, wait a minute. But that was the beginning. We didn't know. It was sort of neat. You know what I mean? There was a couple seals, and then it snowballed out of control, and we all found out, what did we do here? So
yeah, and that's why, for me, and again, I think I can speak for all of us in saying that these NASARC meetings, so the North Atlantic Seal Research Consortium, that brings together not only the biologists and scientists and researchers and fishermen, have been great in starting to open those lines of communication and problem solving together. So for people out there that might be wondering, how do I get involved? Or, I'm a researcher. How do I get into those meetings or talk to the fishermen? Dre, what would you suggest? How do we create those avenues for people to come together and share their ideas?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And I think it starts with, in any situation, in any of these conversations where it may be surprising that we all work together, the reason is, I think all of us can sit and say, well, who am I not talking to? Who isn't in the room? Where have I not actually put my energy and effort and opened up whatever, random knowledge I may have? May seem random, but it's so important to reach out to other people, and think about that. It's so funny when those conversations come up, and I introduced, you weren't on, Doug, about how we met at Stage Harbor, and I walked up to the truck wearing my Mustang, and you're like, what are you doing here? It's just have a conversation. They're great places to just ask a fisherman if that's what you're interested in doing, through researchers or through friends or through any community outreach event that you can think about, and be like, hey, I'd really love to learn from you. Not what can you do for me? That's not what you want to be asking people, but I really want to learn from you. And that opens up so many opportunities across the board, whether it's fishing or learning how to do something you don't know how to do. Learn from each other about what that expertise is that you may not know about, and have fun and ask people, I'd really love to learn from you. Do you think you could spend some time sharing a little bit about yourself or what you know? And I think that can go a long way. But Owen, I send it to you too, because you're the pro as well of doing this, getting people to talk.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to do that, and I think one of the things that we've worked really hard to do is try to create spaces for those conversations, and whether it's a workshop, whatever it is, there's so many different opportunities to get people talking to one another. You and I and Doug have all spent time together, and Ashley as well. At workshops where we've really tried to have conversations on different levels and make sure it's a really mutual kind of shared learning experience. And whether it's getting Doug into the necropsy lab, or getting scientists and stranding responders out on fishing boats, and really creating spaces for those conversations and to learn from one another. And then there's sort of the practical part of it that happens when you're actually on a boat or at the dock and seeing what's happening and starting those conversations. And they can be hard conversations to start sometimes. You don't know one another, you come from different backgrounds, and I think especially for sort of early career scientists or young fishermen or students or whoever it is, sometimes those conversations are a little tricky to start. You find a way, and you stumble through it, and you get there.
Right. Collaborations are key.
I'll agree with
So
that.
let's, Doug, would you like to jump in as well?
Today, yeah, so just a good example is, I was at a 2 days ago, and the parts were screaming about how the data is so far from the truth. And 2 days later, I had a meeting today with my two other cohorts, with the two scientists that are figuring out new models for dogfish. And that's all it took, was just a simple meeting that we talked back and forth. And then today we talked with the scientists that are actually managing that. And we came up with a mutual idea of how we can actually manage that species together without just relying on the bigelow towing a big net once a year in the wrong spot. There's got to be a better way. And it was actually really neat to see today that we actually made headway. It was really cool.
Neat. All right, let's jump into, we've had some questions come in. So for those of you that are watching either on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to type in questions into the chat and they'll pop up for us and we will get to them. But for the first question, and I think probably any of you can speak to this, if there are more seals, does that mean that there are also more fish? How have overall fish catches changed over time? And what else could be affecting the skate, dogfish, and monkfish fisheries? I know that's a long one.
I can take the first part and I'll defer to you guys for the others. And I like this question a lot because it really gets one thinking, right? We all talk about healthy ecosystems. What does that mean? Does it mean there's enough fish for us? Does it mean there's enough fish for the fish? And with seals, I think it's really a great question because they eat a diversity of fish. So their gray seals are considered to be generalists. So whatever's abundant is what they're going to be eating. So there's many species of fishes out there. So it's not necessarily that there's more fish, there's more seals. There could be a certain species that's abundant. This always comes up when we talk about, and this is a tough one, but we talk about things like cod, and there's this perception that they're eating all of this, but it's not common enough for that to be the main part of the diet. But sand lance and these forage fish are. If forage fish were to diminish, and many people don't think about that, they think about the big fish in the supermarket, not the small fish the fish is eating. If those small fish were to disappear, we would all be in trouble. And yes, there would probably be less seals. It's like not a question. That's the base of the ecosystem. It's the currency of the ocean, or these forage fish. So it's a little more complex. You can't just say there's more fish. But if there were a lot fewer, we would know, because our ecosystem would just collapse. So it's a little hard to answer, I guess, in one simple statement. It's complex. Ecosystems are complex, I think, is the answer to that question. First part of that question. I don't know if you want to take over the second part, Doug and Owen, about overall fish catches over time and the effect of, could that be affecting monkfish, skate, and dogfish? What could affect those fisheries?
Sure.
Oh, you want to take a quick stab at it, though?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, sure. All right, so it started off as a glorious industry. We landed codfish. I'm from Cape Cod. Everybody knew, about Cape Cod and codfish. But something happened, and all of a sudden it just went away one day. And we're not going to get into what happened. Whether we overfished it, mismanagement. There's 100 different theories out there. But what we were left with was monkfish, skates, and dogfish. Now, you got to remember, too, that we've always been, beholden to the processor, because every single one of these species that we talk about gets shipped overseas. And that's what I have a problem with, is that all of this stuff that I catch just goes to Europe and Korea. And, I'm making steps myself to change that here with an organization. And we're trying to educate the American consumer about eating underutilized species. It's education. The consumer thinks when I go to the supermarket, I get codfish or swordfish or lobster and that. And we got to stop eating what we want from the ocean and start eating what the ocean provides us. So those three, after the collapse of groundfish, besides haddock is doing really well. That's why you'll see it everywhere. Those are the three fisheries that we're really left with, because codfish was just such a big part of our lives, and it collapsed. It was overnight. And I have my theories on it, and that's what we're left with. And the monk, the skates are doing quite well. Those two fisheries. The dog fisheries, I have my doubts about. I think we're gonna do what we've always done in management, and 5 years from now, we're going to be like, oops, that was a mistake, and they'll shut it down. I would like to try to manage a species, and we have an opportunity with EBM, and if we go eco-based management and we put in all these factors, I think we might have a shot at something. But the way we've always managed species is one at a time. Oh, we wiped out codfish. Okay, well, we'll manage pollock. We'll do this. We gotta. There's hope in the future where we can put everything together in a pie and be like, all right, this is how we need to manage it. Because the way that we've managed fisheries up till now is an absolute disaster. So there's hope for the future. I hope.
Great. Oh, and did you want to chime in with anything before we go into the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of stitch together the things that Dre and Doug said, I mean, we have predator-prey relationships, we have the effects of fishing activity, we have all of these different things to think about when it comes to fish populations. And in the context of ecosystem-based fishery management, like Doug is saying, we have to consider predator-prey relationships, we have to consider us as part of the system, but also we have to think about environmental factors. And we have warming water temperatures, we have all of these things changing in the ocean as well. And so we can't forget about that other piece of the ecosystem, which is environmental factors and how those are changing. So the three-dimensional world that these animals are living in is changing as well. So we have to keep that piece in mind as best we can as well.
Thank you. All right, the next question, this one came in through the chat. Thoughts on how climate change and warming waters may affect seal habitat locations, populations, and pupping. And I can speak a little bit to this personally. So for Ecoscience Marine Mammal Response Territory, we respond in all of New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts to Essex, so right before Cape Ann. So we don't go down as far as Cape Cod, but we always had thought of gray seals pupping on rookeries off Seal Island in Maine, but also down on Cape Cod, whether it be Monomoy, Race Point, areas like that. We, up until a few years ago, never saw gray seal pups in our response territory. We'd see weanlings once they're separated from mom and exploring on their own, because for those of you that don't know, they're only with their mother for 21 to 28 days, and then they're completely independent. But in the last, I'd say 3 years, we've started seeing pups with full lanugo, which is that white birth coat that gray seals have, meaning that they are still considered dependent pups. But, think of it as, these young pups that are only a week or 2 weeks old before they're separated from mom aren't swimming from Seal Island, 20 miles offshore, or down from Cape Cod, up to Maine necessarily. So where are they coming from? And Dre and I have talked about this a little bit. Do we have an area local to our response territory for Seco Science Center where these animals are now pupping? So Dre, you can maybe talk a little bit about that as well and what your thoughts are. Oop, you're muted.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is just another one of those we're still learning as we go forward. But again, kind of reiterate what Owen said, the Gulf of Maine, fastest warming body of water on the planet. Right. And the repercussions of that are multifactorial. So it's that ecosystem part. Warming waters means moving prey. If there isn't prey where, animals need to be to forage, to bulk up, to have, actually be, that's going to cause movement as well. So as the other flip side of it is, we know that this has happened up in Canada where rookeries have actually been washed out as we have increased sea level, bigger storms, and actual whole rookeries have been washed out. So there's these really crazy impacts that can happen a lot faster than we may think they're actually going to happen. But moving prey, warming waters, enough food, shifting sands, that's another one too, of just even having enough land. Muskeget's actually disappearing or moving. It's a little island that's one of the historical pupping grounds, is changing so much. And these inlets and places with the sandbanks like Monomoy, or even probably Great Point, where there's pups now in Nantucket, may not be there with these big storms. So there's a lot of impacts that we're seeing, and they're happening quickly. So yeah, there's so much to do and so much to pay attention to. And this is where being multidisciplinary and talking to one another is so important, so that we can maybe model what's happening and maybe predict it, maybe find out. And as you said, how do you respond now that you've got pups in your backyard being born, just to be ahead of the game?
Right. All right, let's jump into one more question. I think we have a minute. What solution to reduce bycatch do you think is the most promising? Doug or Owen, maybe?
So that's a tough one, because it's going to come down to a management decision. But I'll be 100% honest. The way that gear is fished, I think that will ultimately be the most promising. And we're trying to redesign gear, and that's very promising. So between redesigning gear and maybe making a few adjustments to the way people fish, I think that's going to be pretty darn good.
Great. All right. Well, I think, Owen, do you have anything you'd like to add before we wrap that up?
I mean, I think Doug captured it really well. I think by continuing to work together, and Doug is an engineer and a lot of other things in addition to being a fisherman. You have to be all of those things. Doug's a scientist. He's a little bit of all of those things. And so we're just happy to be able to work with Doug and to help him along his way to creating different ways to fish, and the ways that we can support him in terms of getting underwater video and collecting data, and working with him. But a lot of times these are his ideas that we're just trying to move forward and help make the fishery be more sustainable.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too, before you do run out of time, is Ashley, doing things like this is what is going to find this solution, is getting people together to talk and not be isolated and think that this isn't their issue or their problem, but it's all of ours collectively, is so important.
Right. That's a great point. Great to wrap up with. So I want to thank everybody out there for watching this evening. If there's any questions we didn't get to, we apologize. We couldn't get to all of them. But if there's any burning questions you have, please feel free to reach out to us. If you can't find somebody's information, you can always reach out to me at the Seco Science Center, and I can connect you with Dre, Doug, or Owen. And then our last webinar will be held on March 8th, and we will be talking about right whales with the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life at New England Aquarium. So Doug and Dre and Owen, I want to thank you guys. I don't get to see you nearly enough these days, but hopefully that will be changing. And thank you. Thank you for taking the time to answer some of the burning questions out there and just chat a little bit more about what we've all been up to.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and
thank you. Yeah, it was great. And don't be afraid to start a conversation. It's as simple as that. I saw Dre in a Gumby suit down at the river and thought it was the funniest thing ever. And we started a conversation. Look what we got now.
Right.
So you can't get stuck in your box. You got to be able to talk to people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all, and everybody have a great night.
Thank you.